Welcome, everyone. We will get started soon. Please type in the chat where you are zooming in from this evening, and a gentle reminder to turn on your cameras, as this is important for all of our OFIS events. And I am so sure that our guests want to see your lovely faces. So we got New York, Maryland, Missouri, Virginia, New Orleans, California, the Bronx. Go Yankees. Are they in the playoffs? Maryland, Louisiana, Washington, D.C., Massachusetts, Missouri, Nashville, Yonkers, hello, thank you for joining. We're going to get started. Please type in the chat where you are zooming in from. Gentle reminder to please turn your cameras on. Tucson, Arizona, Solano, Texas, California. All right, I believe we have a full house, so let's get started.
All right, well, welcome everyone to the 2024 Our Future is Science Program Kickoff. I'm Dr. Jelana Sheets, the Associate Director of the Aspen Institute Science and Society Program, and I am thrilled to be here with you all tonight. Our goal is simple: to spark your curiosity and leave you inspired to make a difference. Our Future is Science, just to give you a little background on the organization, although I know you've been through orientation, but it launched in 2020 and was driven by youth activism on critical issues like climate change, water mismanagement, and infectious diseases. It also arose from the urgent need to promote diversity in STEM fields and build a more equitable future. And so the students in our network are the next generation of science and social justice leaders. So that means you. Our Future is Science is built on 4 key pillars: the Mentorship Program, which you're a part of, also our Ambassador Program. And so those are alumni that want to remain in our network. And I see many of them here on the call today. We also have Champions for Social Justice, and those are youth from across the country. And then we have our educational campaigns. Each pillar is designed to empower students to tackle today's most pressing challenges. Over the past 3 years, we've received over 700 applications to our program. And this year we've welcomed 70 new mentees, mentors, and alumni ambassadors. In previous years, we've had around 80 champions for social justice, to add to that number, helping ensure that we make an even greater impact. That being said, we are incredibly grateful for the generous support of our current program sponsors, including the Samueli Foundation, 3M, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Burroughs Wellcome Fund, the Carson Family for Charitable Trust, and the Amgen Foundation. We would also like to acknowledge our founding supporters, including the Rita Allen Foundation, Lyda Hill Philanthropies, Genentech, and the Manitou Fund. Without these funders, none of this would be possible, so we are extremely grateful. And finally, my deepest gratitude for our dedicated team. Together, we're building a future where science and social justice intersect. Thank you, and let's make 2024 an unforgettable year.
Thanks, Jelana. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Hassan. I'm the Senior Manager of Social Justice with OFIS and a Science and Social Justice postdoc with our parent program, the Science and Society program at the Aspen Institute. I first became acquainted with OFIS when I was a mentor in our inaugural program in 2021, while I was finishing my doctorate at Virginia Tech. And since then, I've helped develop the ambassador program for other former mentors and mentees who wanted to stay involved. Whether it's through Canvas, Slack, or email, I'm sure you'll be seeing a lot of me, and I'll be seeing a lot of you. I'm looking forward to it. Caroline is also one of our staff members. She's not today, but she does want to send her regards to everybody. She will be a producer and a content developer with us. Her role at OFIS is to help bring the experience during this next year to life through real world research, storytelling, and creating capstone projects that have the potential for a much needed and real change. I'll pass it on to Ebony.
Hi, my name is Ebony Tyler, and my role at OFIS is a science and social justice advisor, and I'm responsible for the administration and organization of the program. By training, I'm a vocational rehabilitation counselor and an educational administrator. I run a community-based nonprofit called Liberated Success, and we facilitate HBCU tours, SAT prep, and career development workshops and career mentorship program. And I will pass it to Brianna.
Hi everyone, my name is Brianna. I'm an OFIS Mentor alum. I was a part of the program last year. Shout out to my team, they're amazing. Currently now I'm a program assistant with our Future is Science and Science Society. I'm also a fourth year PhD candidate at Virginia Tech studying translational biology, medicine, and health. And my research involves understanding Black women's health and wellness perspectives. And I'm also a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dorianis, and I'm a project assistant for OFIS, working with the Ambassador Program. I was a mentor during the first year of the Our Future is Science program and was an ambassador and then a lead ambassador. I'm also a postdoctoral research associate at Los Alamos National Lab, where I do artificial intelligence research.
Thanks, everybody. So we are thrilled to have such an amazing group who will be demonstrating how STEM disciplines can be used to impact societal and social justice issues. So welcome aboard, mentees, mentors, and ambassadors to the Mentorship Program. High schoolers, undergraduates, graduate students in our ambassador program, and of course, our science and social justice champions. This year, we also are grateful to have received funding from the Carson Family Charitable Trust, enabling us to support 5 of our students who are here today. The Carson Family Charitable Trust focuses on funding initiatives that alleviate poverty and support community development in New York City. This year, they're generously supporting 5 students from the New York City boroughs. We are thrilled to publicly announce our inaugural Carson Family Charitable Trust, Our Future is Science Scholars. We have mentees Adele from the Bronx, Messina from the Bronx, Helena from Yonkers, and Adriana from the Yonkers, and an ambassador of our program, Therese, who's in New York. Let's give a big round of applause to these exceptional students. The funding provided by these organizations has allowed us to accept more scholars and mentors than in previous years, for which we are immensely grateful.
So before we begin our talk, we'd like to take a moment to hear from all of you about what makes you excited to be a part of Our Future is Science. What are you inspired? Why are you inspired to be a part of this program? So please put your comments in the chat and we'll read out a few. So I'm excited to use science and world change, making real noticeable changes in my community, meeting others with the same interest and passion as me, joining people to make a change in our community. I'm inspired to learn new things and to use my curiosity to benefit others. I'm excited to be a part of this OFIS program because it gives me a voice to talk about social and scientific issues that are overlooked in mainstream media. I'm excited to work with like-minded people who are dedicated to pursue change through science. I'm excited at the prospect of mentoring people and making real change in society. I feel as though I feel as though everywhere is happening, there's problems, and if I fix what's happening around me, then I'll be changing the world. These are great, so keep them coming, and I do believe we are ready to start today's presentation.
Alrighty, so for today's kickoff event, we are actually beginning the monthly community talk series, where you will meet a range of people working to combat societal issues with science, technology, math, or engineering. And tonight we have two speakers. So first you'll hear from Dr. James Doucet-Battle. James Doucet-Battle is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology and co-director of the Science and Justice Research Center at the University of California, Santa Cruz. A medical anthropologist, his research and teaching interests lie at the intersections of science, technology, and society studies, diaspora studies, development studies, and anthropological approaches to health and medicine. He applies these interests to study the political economy of genomic discourses about race, gender, risk, and health disparities. His book, Sweetness in the Blood, Race, Risk, and Type 2 Diabetes, examines the translational challenges facing clinical research recruitment and community education outreach efforts aimed towards at-risk minority groups, particularly African, diasporic, and transnational populations. So before we get started, we're going to ask everyone to please hold your questions or put them in the chat. And we will have a Q&A session at the end where we will try our best to answer all of your questions. So without further ado, Dr. Doucet-Battle, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Dorianis. Thank you, Aspen Institute. And I'm so glad to be here. And once again, I'd like to also say hello to all of you scholars. Congratulations to all of you for being part of this fabulous program. And I would like to share some of my work and some of the networks that I belong to and what we're doing in the area of science and justice. And hopefully you'll find it generative and useful for you and your studies and your work moving forward. And next slide, please. So this is a brief outline of what I'm going to be relating in the next 10 or so minutes. This is my first time hearing the term STEAM, and I think it's wonderful that the arts and the medical and the humanities are being brought into this conversation. And hopefully I will be able to weave some of that into my conversation as well. And I look forward to your questions at the end. Next slide, please. Okay, so I was asked to give a little bio as to who I am and where I'm from. I was born in Rochester, New York, the home of Eastman Kodak Company. And what's interesting about Rochester, New York is that it's a city where Frederick Douglass published his North Star, if you've ever heard of it. And it's also a city where changes in technology had profound effects and implications on the city and the future of the city. So those of you who are familiar with Eastman Kodak know that they held a monopoly on in the photographic industry, but they made the crucial and fatal mistake of thinking that we all were going to use film in our cameras forever. They actually invented the digital camera and decided not to pursue developing it further. The rest is history, and that had, once again, profound effects not only on the company, but on the city. So seeing the ways in which technology, history, implicit biases affect the ways in which innovation is produced, or the ways in which innovation is foreclosed, was part and parcel of my upbringing in that city. I received my PhD at the UC Berkeley, UC San Francisco Joint Medical Anthropology Program, but here I am in a department of sociology. The subdiscipline that really unifies my work is science and technology studies. And the fun fact is that I'm an enthusiastic amateur ethnobotanist. And I think that this might be a useful way of saying, Enjoy your coursework, do your best. You never know where you're going to end up. I entered grad school thinking that I was going to study ethnobotany in the Caribbean, and my advisor had moved from botany to pharma, and the rest was history. So the ethnobotany is still part of my interest, and it's also forming part of my future work, as I shall relate later. Next slide, please. One of the most, I'd say the most influential work that I read in graduate school was Sidney Mintz's Sweetness and Power. And if you haven't read it, I greatly suggest that you do. It's a thin volume, but extremely influential. And it examines sugar as both a historical commodity and an illness metaphor. Those of you may have heard that some people in certain communities refer to diabetes as sugar or azúcar. And this book talks about the ways in which sugar not only created fantastic and unprecedented levels of wealth, but also the ways in which it initiated technological revolutions, the Industrial Revolution, and more importantly, perhaps, is the ways in which it changed nutritional and metabolic destinies in both the North and in the South. Next slide, please. So inspired by that, I conducted a dissertation and book research project that looked at type 2 diabetes from the perspective of a health disparities standpoint, particularly the African American, African descent population. And that eventually became a project that dove deeply into genomics and brought out larger questions of research ethics. So when I began my project, it cost about $100,000 to sequence a genome. The price dropped precipitously in the next, 3 years. And by 2011, the price was down to $3,000 or so. And of course, it's dropped even further. That changed everything. And we'll get into that as well moving forward. Next slide, please. We're meeting virtually, so I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I would really, really be interested to know and hope that you have read or heard of the story of Henrietta Lacks. I would strongly suggest reading the book. Skip the movie, read the book. And if you don't have time to read the book, you can go onto YouTube and watch a film that Adam Curtis put together for the BBC called The Way of All Flesh. And it talks about the Henrietta Lacks story. And it was made in the late 90s when some of her children were still alive. So I would greatly recommend that book. And what's important about the Henrietta Lacks story is that the HeLa cell, which was collected from her body, revolutionized cell biology. Cell biology was struggling for relevance and for any sort of advancements in the early 50s, and the HeLa cell completely changed that. So this is a story of an African descent woman who was born in the former slave quarters of a tobacco plantation, whose cell line completely changed not only cellular history, cellular biological history, but also made us think about bioethics and the ways in which someone who was relegated to the colored ward of a hospital is the originator of a cell line that continues to travel, continues to infiltrate laboratories around the world and changes the signature of cell lines. So those of you who are familiar with HeLa probably know this. Those of you who aren't, I would strongly suggest that you learn more about it. Next slide, please. This is the HeLa cell. It's an amazing biological agent. It's an amazing, it has an amazing intelligence about it. And you can buy HeLa cells online. You can buy HeLa jewelry. It's become quite the item, and the family has been engaged in long negotiations to help to redirect some of that intellectual property back to the family. Next slide, please. So there's a bioethical history around research in inclusion, consent in the African descent population, most notably in the US, in the Tuskegee syphilis study. It lasted almost 40 or 50 years. It occurred in plain sight. You can go online. There were scientific papers published throughout the duration of its study, but it raises questions that persist to this day about how do we enroll disadvantaged, minoritized, marginalized communities into bioscientific research. Tuskegee was closed down in the early 1970s by William Jenkins, close colleague who passed away a few years ago. And it remains one of several examples in which the need for people working in science and technology studies, people working in bioethics, are necessary in order to ensure a measure of social justice in scientific research. And this is something that we've been seeking to address in the University of California system. Next slide. Thank you. So the University of California has created a UC-HBCU initiative, which aims to bring talented students from HBCUs to the University of California system for intensive research experiences during the summer, with the hopes of them identifying faculty that they would like to work with in graduate school. Now, this is extremely important because those of you who have been, or I hope that you, if you have the opportunity to, become members of, say, the McNair Scholars Program, that you do that. This is one of these stepping stones that I think is really important. We talk about the pipeline and getting diversity students into the pipeline, but we also need diversity faculty to help pull students through the pipeline and to keep their backs, watch their backs when they're in graduate school, and give them the support and the mentorship that they need. So we have applied for this initiative. We've come up short, but we've got great feedback, and we're going to apply again this year. So we decided to flip the script. Why should predominantly white institutions pluck the best talent from HBCUs? It's almost an extractive relationship where HBCUs are used to cultivate this raw material that PWIs develop further and create situations for them to reflect to the greater glory of the PWI. So we said, why don't we flip this script and take diversity students to at the University of California to an HBCU for a week of summer research experiences. And this is just what we did this year. Next slide, please. So we created the Pan-African Research Fellowship Program. It's called the Growing Our Own Initiative. And we brought 8 undergraduates and 2 graduate students to North Carolina A&T State University, which graduates the largest number of Black engineers of any university in this country. And they spent a week in Dr. Joseph Graves' biomolecular science lab, or excuse me, molecular biology lab. Wonderful experience, an unqualified success. The students want to come back next year. They want it to be 2 weeks. They've offered to help raise funds that won't be needed because we have the funds. And I think that particularly for graduate students, with the discontinuation of the Ford Fellowship Program next year, we are looking to find ways to fill those gaps and create those opportunities for diversity students. So as you proceed along in your educational studies and in your careers, please keep these programs in mind. Next slide, please. So this is what we've worked out. Sometimes we see STEM spelled in different ways, mathematics and medicine, but this is what we have been working on and what we have executed this past year. Dr. Graves has fully funded PhD student slots available. So for those of you who are looking for a graduate program in biomolecular engineering, North Carolina A&T State University is a great place to be. Dr. Graves just received an award from the Society for Biological Anthropology this past week for his book, Racism, Not Race. So we are using these relationships to build out a larger proposal. And we'd like to demonstrate a balanced reciprocity between our campuses. Almost done here. Next slide, please. So your work in the future, if you haven't seen these two brilliant young ladies who were featured on 60 Minutes from St. Mary's Academy in New Orleans, please check out their work, check out this episode. They solved a 2,000-year-old Pythagorean equation, and no one expected it to come from such a place, from such people at such an age. So they have completely changed the ways in which people look at this particular area of mathematics. I'm sure that they've received offers for university who are eager to get them. And it's an example about how we can never really tell about what an experience in a particular class, in a particular semester, with a particular professor or advisor or mentor can do or mean for catalyzing your work, catalyzing your research, and completely changing your life. Next slide, please. For more information or to get in touch or to learn more about my work, I'm on academia.edu, ResearchGate, as well as LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. I'm excited about your work and where you'd like to go with it. And I wish you all the best moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Doucet-Battle. Thank you for sharing so many critical moments in your life that have made you who you are today. And just a quick reminder to everybody in the chat, you can put in your questions into the chat. We will answer those Q&As after Dr. Cole Allick speaks. So without further ado, we are very pleased to introduce our next keynote speaker and another OFIS alum, Dr. Cole Allick. So Dr. Allick is a research assistant professor at Washington State University in the Institute for Research and Education to Advance Community Health. Dr. Cole Allick, he's an assistant professor in the Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine and iReach. He is a proud citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band of the Chippewa Indians. Dr. Allick holds a PhD in Indigenous Health, a Master of Health Administration, and a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and Public Administration. He's passionate about working with elders and is focused on Alzheimer's disease research and associated topics. Dr. Allick is also very interested in Indigenous research methods, which represent the interplay between outreach and engagement and methods. He's hoping to collaborate with colleagues on the methods core and continue to build those skill sets as he continues his own projects. Dr. Allick loves being in community, whether it is with a research project or just conversing with elders or other community members. He finds that being in that space nurtures his soul and allows him to make a more positive space for his collaborators and teammates as they conduct important work at iReach. Dr. Allick is also an avid volleyball player and weightlifter and loves to travel. When he's not doing these things, he is coaching volleyball or spending time with his friends and family. Dr. Allick is so grateful that his work allows him to travel and collaborate with Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike across the world. Dr. Cole Allick, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. I completely forgot what bio I sent you. So I was listening like, wow, that's thorough. Good job, Cole. Good evening, everyone. I'm excited to be back with my OFIS family. And one of my co-mentors was actually just DM'd me. So hi, Edward. It's nice to see you again. So the world is small, just so everybody knows. But I'm excited to just share a little bit about myself, kind of my story, and connect with this new cohort. And so again, welcome to everybody. I'm super excited that this is kicking off such an important program, and I'm hopeful that you all get a lot out of this. I definitely did as a mentor. As mentioned, I'm a proud citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, and over the next few slides, you're going to see sprinkled throughout my decisions and how I ended up in academics, as well as a little bit about my work. On this slide, or next slide, please. So you'll see here on this fun fact piece, yes, I was born with 6 fingers on each hand, but they tied them off when I was very little. And so I was already a scientific anomaly before I started. But yeah, just can you go to the next slide? Forgot about the title slide, so I was behind, but all good. So in our short time for this presentation, I kind of wanted to follow my path to how I got to academics because it was not something I was planning. I did not see myself as an academic. So you'll see on this slide that there are key academic points listed above with my degrees and my current role, but I wanted to infuse my thoughts that I had during each phase because I think it reflects the audience in the room. And so, early on, so pre-undergrad, I spent a lot of my junior high and high school summers attending a summer camp that was enhancing my math and science skills. And this was due in large part to a goal of mine, which was become a doctor, a medical doctor. And so I wanted to be in healthcare. And, I thought, okay, I'm going to go be a doctor. Here are some programs for me to kind of enhance my skill sets. That led me to apply to the University of North Dakota and get my psychology public administration degree. I got into undergrad and thought, well, these pre-med classes aren't sitting well with me. I wasn't doing so well. It wasn't fitting. And so I started taking some different electives and thought, okay, wait, this doesn't make any sense. Or it's not sitting right with these classes. But I started taking public health and I was like, well, what the heck is this? And that led me to develop an interest in public health. And so by that point, I had psychology and public administration pretty much done, and I didn't want to add another major. So I looked forward to grad school. And so I got accepted into a master's of health administration, recognizing that I wanted to do health management, health systems, and policy. And so I applied to University of Washington here in Seattle, where I still live, mostly because it was a top program. It was a top 10 program, and I felt like this was my way of mastering the Western healthcare delivery model in the United States to help supplement my experience as a tribal citizen in my particular healthcare delivery model, which I will talk about in a few slides. And so I got to UW and thought, okay, let me start changing the systems. Let me put that hat on. After I got my master's in health administration, I started working for a few years, and I always thought I would go back and get some sort of, terminal degree, like potentially go to law school. But right around the same time, the pandemic hit and a PhD in Indigenous health opened up. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to look into it. I'm going to see if this is a good fit. I'd already been working at Washington State University, so I'd kind of dipped my toes into academics. And at this time, I was thinking how unique it would be for me to learn from Native scholars, especially prominent Native health policy and health management scholars. And so a pandemic was a great time to get a PhD, I guess, since we had nothing else to do. And so I got that degree. And because I was at Wazoo before, I just transitioned last year into a research assistant professor position. And so I was doing a PhD and working full time, which I do not recommend for anybody that's on the call, but figured out a way to stay in academics and thought that, maybe this is a path for me to kind of do everything that I want to in my career. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. Perfect. So I mentioned that I needed to give a little bit of context, and this could probably be a presentation for another day. But my interest in healthcare and policy is directly tied into the unique status of American Indians and Alaska Natives in this country. And so on the right, you see a treaty that was signed between the Potawatomi Nation and the US government. In this tiny little red box, which you guys can't see, it says that the US government promised all proper care and protection to this tribal nation for the exchange of land and other resources. What this boils down to is that American Indians and Alaska Natives have a legal right to health care per the United States Constitution. And that care is provided to us via the Indian Health Service. Next slide, please. And so compounding this unique status and this unique system that provides healthcare to tribal communities like my own is that Indigenous research history, which I think there were themes in the last presentation too, there has been a negative connotation in some ways. A lot of research that's occurred in tribal nations in particular is referred to as helicopter research. And this research, it fails to see people from my community as people and sees us just as subjects. And so it's referred to as helicopter because researchers come in, they do a research study, and then they leave with no benefit to the community, no engagement of the community. And what that boils down to is that the research is largely not usable for those of us in community. However, I am part of a movement, as others are, who are trying to change these systems and use science as a tool for social justice and healing. And academics is just one space that I'm able to do that. Next slide. So if you haven't read between the lines yet, let me say explicitly, I did not anticipate becoming an academic professor. But at Wazoo, before the pandemic hit, my early days were spent adjusting to this new environment. So before that, I had worked in healthcare consulting, which was a very busy, exciting time. I was working with largely rural hospitals. So in addition to being a native person, I'm also from a very, very, very small town. So rural health is also a passion of mine. But in this new role that I started, I was mostly excited about hitting the road and meeting community, and understanding how research was being done in communities. And so I was fortunate that UND's program opened up and I was accepted into the Indigenous Health PhD program. And while I was there, I was really able to solidify my focus on Alzheimer's disease and support my own approach to Indigenous health research. At the same time, because at the end of the day, we're all still people as we go into these systems, my last living grandparent passed away while I was in school. And this really underscored my commitment to serving Indigenous elders through systems change and research. Next slide, please. And so, one of the unique roles in my job is that I have the ability to host what we call brain health events. This is through an NIH-funded project. But these events are a bi-directional exchange of knowledge and information to promote brain health while also meeting some research goals. In one station that I want to call out in particular, we host a saliva donation station where Indigenous elders can learn about genetic research that still needs to occur for us to better understand Alzheimer's disease among elders. Nationally, those that have participated in these types of studies have largely been rich white people. And this is because they have the financial means to go to these big academic medical centers and participate in these clinical studies. And so what we see today is a national call for more representation, not just from Native people, but from underrepresented communities in these Alzheimer's disease research centers. And so these events that we host, the best way to probably think of them is a health fair. They include assessments, tests, activities, conversations, food, and resources, including compensation for participating. This is really important for the work that we do because reciprocity and asking elders for their time, we need to make sure that we're honoring that. Next slide, please. So what this means for me, and one lesson that I've known since I started, was that this work doesn't happen without meaningful stakeholders and partners. Without them, this work just simply wouldn't happen. This is one way to just challenge that helicopter research that occurs. And so this is a photo of me running the saliva station in April, I think, of 2023, or just before I defended my dissertation. So if I look tired, I probably was. But I was nervous at first because given the poor context and image of research and researchers and community, I was a little apprehensive, but I found that just by being there and showing up and being being from a community, a similar community, a different tribal nation, allowed for more opportunities to build trust. So they would see me in these videos talking about Alzheimer's disease, but then they would look up and see me at one of the stations talking to them. And so what that really means is that you have to be in community to apply any of these concepts, social justice, decolonization, anti-racism. What matters is that relationships exist for us to do the work. Next slide, please. All right, 2 more slides, y'all. And so today I still carry that systems brain beyond being in community, actually doing my work. I'm lucky that I get to participate in different components of the academic space. And so I teach American Indian health policy to undergrads, to graduate students. Next summer, I'll be teaching to tribal students at tribal colleges and universities. I serve on the National Alzheimer's Coordinating Center, where I get to help develop their Indigenous data governance policy to combat some of those historical injustices and improper research practice. And then locally with my state, I'm actually serving as a governor appointee on the Dementia Action Collaborative. And so try to have my hands in a bunch of different systems. Next slide, please. And so I want to bring this all back to you guys because you're the most important, piece of this, and just take us back up to the 30,000-foot view. I'm lucky that I was already part of OFIS as a mentor, and so I wanted to just share a few reflections. One of the things I want to say is just connect with people, whether it's in your mentorship meetings or through your academics. Hearing stories from people about how they got where they are in their careers is a really great way to figure out your own. I listen to people present just like I am today, and that's what inspired me to think through, well, who do I want to be in 10, 15 years? It seems like a long time, but the more you connect with people, the more you realize it's not just a linear path, right? There's these kind of ebbs and flows. The second thing is, as with most things in life, is you get what you put in. And so do the work, lean in, be present. I promise it will serve you later in life. There may be something that happens in this or someone you might meet that in, 3 to 5 years when you're finishing up your undergrad or graduate degrees, you might want to reach out to and see what they're doing. And the last piece was a specific experience I had with one of my mentees when I was a mentor. Very early on, she said, take space and make space. And I have sat with that and lived that for the last 2+ years since I heard it. I see my path forward, but find myself carving room for others to join through teaching, mentorship, connecting with students, like opportunities like this, other professionals. And so, like you guys, I was very excited to also participate and listen to my other keynote speaker. And so as you all began this journey, just remember to take space and never forget to make it for others. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Dr. Cole Allick. Your work and the direction it led you in your professions is incredibly inspiring. For both Dr. Doucet-Battle and Dr. Allick, your talks are basically the blueprints for the capstone projects our mentees will be working on this year. They're perfect examples of how our students will learn about societal issues, who their stakeholders and audience are, how science can play a role in developing solutions, and of course, the evidence that backs those solutions. The OFIS community here tonight, both students and staff, are even more sure of the work ahead that we have will do a good part, not just in our communities, but hopefully the world. Thank you both. All right, now I pass the baton to Brianna, who will get us started on the Q&A section.
Thank you so much, Hassan. So, like he said, we have a few questions. So, if you have a question, please use the raise your hand feature and put in the chat. We will ask you to unmute yourself and turn your video on. However, we do have some questions from the chat first. You are very inspiring, both of you all. And so, from our ambassador, Therese, how were you able to narrow down the community you wanted to research for your PhD? Was it trial and error process, or did you instinctively know in some sense?
Excuse me, who was that question directed to?
I think both of you all didn't say specifically, so both.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. So how were you able to narrow down the community you wanted to research for your PhD? Was it a trial and error process, or did you instinctively know in some sense?
For me, it was a pretty straightforward process of coming from a family that came out of the sugarcane fields of Southwest Louisiana, and having read Sidney Mintz's Sweetness and Power, even though it was focused mostly on the Caribbean, those of you who know something about Southern Louisiana and the Creole culture knows that there are some elements of overlap culturally and historically with the Caribbean. And having a grandmother who was a type 2 diabetic for most of her adult life just kind of brought the whole thing together for me. And that's what fueled my interest in examining this from a scholarly perspective and writing a dissertation and a book on it. And I think doing that for and through the history of the family is what really drove me.
Yeah, for me, it was it kind of fell into, because I was working full time and going to school full time. I stumbled into an Alzheimer's project at work and started writing my scholarly papers at school on them, and then started getting feedback from people that there aren't a lot of young native scholars interested in Alzheimer's disease. And so my one of my mentors kept me, on track by saying, if you can make school and work fit both, do that. And so while there was sort of that personal push with like my grandma getting sick and losing her through the program, part of it was the community feedback too. And so it just kind of kept spiraling and kept working. And so I sort of just trusted the process because I was pretty burnt out to like think through that myself. Um, but yeah, now I've found a way to make health systems research work because long-term support services in this country are sorely lacking. And so I found a way to kind of pivot and make sure everything connects.
Awesome. Thank you so much for both answering that question. I think it definitely highlights how everybody's journey, it can be completely different, and that's okay. I see that Sophia has her hand raised, so I would like her, or I would invite them to unmute, to ask the question.
Yes, I actually put it into the chat, but I would love to say it out loud. For both of you, what is some advice you would give your younger self? And did you have a similar passion when you were younger to the passion you have now? And if yes, what did you do to prepare for your career now?
Well, as I responded in the chat, one bit of advice that I would tell my younger self is to never say no to myself. Let them say no to you. And I think along those lines is to not compare yourself with other people, other students around you who may have come from perhaps more privileged backgrounds or better resource school districts, or who may have gone to an Ivy League school. Now you're in grad school, you're in a PhD program, you're here to conceive, execute, and complete an original research project. And that is the focus. And what I found in grad school was that there were quite a few people who went to some pretty good undergraduate programs who couldn't finish their PhD programs. And it gave me a sense of just how far privilege can take some people. Um, and that's really important, is to have your focus on your project, and to network broadly, not to shrink away from conversations or spaces that are uncomfortable or um, sometimes threateningly undiverse, I'll say, and to just understand that you're in graduate school because of the uniqueness of your project and the promise that it has. So in terms of my younger self, those are the two things that I would say.
Yeah, I love that. I think imposter syndrome is so real. And just we kind of sell ourselves short, and the comparisons happen all the time. And, especially in the academic space, which I now find myself in, with colleagues who, gone to Ivy League schools, and I'm like, I went to state schools. But yeah, if I could go back, I would have probably told myself not to go to UW because it was really expensive and I'm still paying student loans, despite people thinking that all Native people go to school for free. Um, but there are pathways out too if you find yourself in that situation. I'm a recipient of the Loan Repayment Award for the National Institute of Health. And so I get to basically do my research and work in a research setting while they make payments to my pretty significant student loan debt. And so I'm a big champion of knowing that and sharing that with people. And so I would go back and just say, you know, value your connections and the networks that you have, because I had mentors help me navigate these systems when I was, stuck in my own personal kind of imposter syndrome and, comparing myself to others. So I would echo a lot of what was just said.
Thank you so much for both answering that question. And we are still going to ask you both a question. What keeps you passionate about academia and research?
I'll start. I think there's one thing that no one really tells you is like academic freedom to some degree. Like when you get into this space and you've, unlocked that door, having the ability to craft your career. I think in the last 6 months, I've realized that like I can pivot in my research direction which at first was supporting, more clinical participation in Alzheimer's disease research centers. But I realized that my interest is health systems, health policy. And now I'm at this kind of crossroads, if you will, where I'm like, wait, I have a lot more power than I thought. And so I think recognizing your power and your interests and how it might lead you. But that's what's getting me excited. And then, the positive feedback from community, the networks that I have, being invited to do talks like this are also, for me, if I can be of even some inspiration to someone to navigate the system, that's what gets me going, right? My week of writing wasn't necessarily the most inspiring, but knowing that I had a chance to come to a community and a space that I know, I think that's what gets me going during the week.
I would say that one of the things that keeps me passionate about academia and research are you guys, the students. You learn so much from you. I really must say. The other thing too is what I'm also learning from my students are the ways in which social changes, particularly in the area of type 2 diabetes and cardiometabolic disorders, have been affected and influenced by recent events. During the pandemic, we all sheltered in place, we locked down, we ordered food in, we binged watched, we stopped exercising. And according to the American Psychological Association, most of us by a factor of 2 gained weight. Now we have these new classes of GLP-1 drugs that are coming out that promise to take weight off of our bodies without us exercising. And as someone whose work focuses on cardiometabolic disorders to a large extent, in view of the American Diabetes Association and American Heart Association recommending that we all get 180 minutes of aerobic exercise per week, I'm just looking at the social and technological tensions that are creating a new moment as we enter the second quarter of the 21st century about how we relate to our bodies, about how the healthcare system is going to deal with all of these changes in the social body. And I think one of my larger areas of interest as an anthropologist is how this long process of encephalization, our brains growing, has been influences our relationship with these handheld devices that we scroll through for hours aimlessly every day. And what does that mean for the future of not only the ways in which we move, but the ways in which we think and how we relate to each other? So these are the things that keep me passionate about my work.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those in-depth answers. So for Dr. Allick, what are some of the specific strategies you've used to build trust between the community and yourself and your colleagues as research scientists, especially as you talked about how helicopter research can be extremely detrimental and is?
Yeah, for me, it boils down to relationships and some of the relationships that I've had even in undergrad. Um, when you stay consistent and authentic to yourself, whether you're an undergrad, your master's degree, PhD, come back 7, 8 years later, those relationships have gotten more doors open and built some immediate trust with communities maybe I haven't worked with previously. One thing that I think people get mistaken is that just because I'm a native person doesn't mean that I get a free pass to other native communities too. And so much like other non-natives, like I have to do my work. I have to come in and be a good guest when I'm visiting community. But I think being like physically there matters so much in research. That you show up in like the public service announcement videos about Alzheimer's disease, but then you're there managing the station and, you're hanging out for a little bit. Academics is a hard space for, actual time to spend in community the way it's needed to build relationships. But you've got to find ways to do it. And I think, yeah, like I said, authenticity for me is probably the biggest thing. I try to show up in my personal and professional spaces as much as I can, like being respectful, listening, showing up when I need to. And I found that served me really well. One of the highest compliments I get from my colleagues is like, I really like you. You just get what you get, whether it's, whether it's a work meeting or it's outside of work or making relationships, like you're consistent throughout. So knowing what your values are and what you bring to the table too, I think is really important.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that explanation. I definitely think it's important as we talk about bridging the gap between science and social justice, just also understanding the power dynamic and the roles that we have doing our due diligence. I also want to take the time to invite anybody that might have a question. I thought I saw somebody's hand raised and they went down real fast. If you want to unmute and ask.
Hi, so this is for oh my gosh, Dr. Allick. So I know oh my gosh, I can't see his name on screen. I know that Dr. Doucet, he like mentioned a bunch of books to read, and I always love when speakers do that because it like gives me more to read off of the topic you guys are interested in. So do you have any books or studies on like the healthcare of Indigenous people?
Yeah, I got a couple books that I can recommend. One of them is Braiding Sweetgrass. It doesn't really touch on it talks about science and it's more storytelling, but it's a really strong book. The other one is maybe Science of the Sacred by Dr. Nicole Redvers. And then the other thing I'd point you guys all to, because I think it's just really, really great work, especially if you don't know much about Native people, it's Reclaiming Native Truth. So if you just Google that, there's like a guide for allies, and it talks a lot about the dominant, stereotypes about Native people and reorients the reader to um, communities now. But I would say those couple of things are, yes, perfect. Thank you, Bree, for putting those in there in the chat.
Thank you so much. I'm currently in APU's history, and we just finished like our unit on Indigenous peoples, and we will continue to like talk about their influence in America. So I would
Oh,
like to
cool.
share.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for asking that question. I also wrote down the books too that were mentioned, so I have them on my sticky notes to buy later as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for asking that question, Shalisha. It was a very good question, especially to bring back resources to your classmates. I see that Edward has their hand up, so I'll let you unmute.
Thanks. And also, so thanks both of you for speaking with us today. And also, it's so nice to see you again, Dr. Alex. So yeah, thanks for doing this. I'm really glad. Yeah, I'm sort of curious, I guess, like, when do you think you first realized that these disparities were in place? And then also for certain things like the helicopter research, for example, like how widely do you think it is known within like the community that this is a thing that's going on rather than just like it's a disparity that's known among researchers? And potentially whether that has anything to do with like how old community members are when they like first realize this. I don't know if there's like a personal story there or not. I'm just like because I obviously like don't know anything about this from like a personal perspective, so I'm curious about that. And thanks so
Yeah.
much again.
Yeah, I can share two things. And so, I received healthcare at Indian Health Service. So they have a model where it's either run by the federal government, it's either run by tribes, or it's run by an urban native program. And so mine was run by the federal government, which meant that it was kind of sterile and didn't really have my culture, embedded. And so saw a lot of disparities from just like access and lack of providers in my community. And so just knew that system was broken, especially from like a community conversation. A lot of people were like, oh, we have to go to that hospital, like, or they didn't cover this, or this specialist isn't available, or we don't have a dentist. We don't have a dentist right now, actually. So dental care is hard to get to. And so that's why I was like, okay, medical school makes sense, right? Be a clinician. And then that's when I had my personal revelation that I was like, maybe I'm more of a systems person. And then regarding the community dialogues on research, there actually are, it is pretty well known. Like the Havasupai had a really bad genetic study done where there was blood samples taken. So there's lots of examples. And I think even in the last couple of years of a few examples of pretty poor studies being done. And so there is kind of the growing field of indigenous research methods. And then with the unique status of tribal nations as the government to government relationship with the US, we're seeing increased like approval mechanisms that need to go into place, both at the community level with tribal nations and then also at the university setting. And so I would say it's pretty common knowledge that you have to do a lot of relationship building. And I would say for the most part, there's definitely protocol to follow to avoid, how research has been done previously.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Great. So we are now at the 5:30 mark, so we'll do our closing very quick. Another big round of applause, Zoom reactions for our speakers. Wonderful work sharing relevant and actionable information with all of us. And another big round of applause and Zoom reaction for you. Thank you all, mentees, mentors, ambassadors, champions, supporters. All of you are incredibly supportive for this program, and we're looking forward to getting to know you all better throughout the year. Before we close this portion of the evening, there are just important reminders we want to share with all of you. The newsletter, of course, tomorrow will have a ton of information for everybody, but there's important things we want to share while we have it. Mentees, mentors, and ambassadors, you should all have access to both Slack and Canvas. If you are missing access or do not have access to either of those, stay on after this call, and we can try and troubleshoot very quickly. The second one, mentorship team introductions will be made on Friday, tomorrow, via Slack invitation. So we know all of you are very eager to get to know who your teammates are going to be. That information will be shared with you guys tomorrow. Also, mentees and mentors, before you have your mentorship team meetings, you must pass all of your quizzes. So for the mentors, you have your 3 mentor training quizzes. Mentees, you have your 2 orientation quizzes. Those quizzes can be taken an unlimited amount of times, and you have to get a passing score of 80%. That's just to make sure that everybody's prepared for the discussions and also are aware of risk management, among other things. Last but not least, ambassadors. So we will be meeting next week on Tuesday. We'll be going over connections between science and social justice in preparation for our upcoming community chat. Whew. So with that, we've finished all of our announcements. This has been great. Thank you all. Be sure to complete the attendance form. The form will close at 9:15 Eastern Standard Time. Please visit our website, ourfutureisscience.org, and follow us on social media to learn more about our initiative, future events, and our educational campaign. Until next time, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
so much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.